When the headline "Morgan Freeman Heartbreaking Reaction to Why Rob Reiner's Son Ended It" began appearing online, it instantly stopped people in their tracks. The words were heavy, emotional, and final, the kind that don't invite curiosity, but demand belief. Within minutes, fans assumed a devastating truth had been revealed, and not one of Hollywood's most respected. Voices was reacting to an unbearable personal loss, but what most people never realized was how carefully that headline was constructed. There was no official confirmation behind it. No verified statement from Rob Reiner or his family. No recorded reaction from Morgan Freeman himself. Yet the phrasing was powerful enough to make those missing facts feel irrelevant. The emotion came first, and logic never got a chance to catch up. Morgan Freeman's name carries extraordinary weight. His voice represents wisdom, empathy, and emotional depth. When his name is paired with words like heartbreaking and ended it, audiences don't stop to question the claim. They feel it. That emotional trust becomes a shortcut, allowing a story to spread without proof. Reiner's silence only added to the illusion. Known for protecting his family's privacy, he said nothing publicly. In today's digital world, that silence was quickly misread as confirmation. Speculation filled the gap, and repetition turned rumor into perceived truth. This isn't just a story about a shocking headline. It's about how easily tragedy can be implied, how quickly emotions override facts, and how powerful names can be used to sell a narrative before the truth ever has a chance to speak. When the headline about Morgan Freeman and Rob Reiner's son began spreading, most viewers assumed the story had already been verified somewhere else. That assumption is exactly how narratives like this gain momentum. People believe that if a headline exists in multiple places, someone must have checked the facts. In reality, many of these stories originate from a single vague claim that gets repeated until it feels real. The wording played a crucial role. The phrase "ended it" leaves very little room for interpretation, yet it also avoids directly stating details that could be fact-checked. This kind of language is intentional. It creates emotional certainty without offering factual clarity. Readers are pulled into a conclusion without being given anything concrete to examine. By the time doubt arises, the emotional reaction has already happened. Morgan Freeman's name amplified the impact instantly. He is not just a famous actor. He represents calm authority and moral gravity in the public mind. When audiences see his name connected to a heartbreaking situation, they subconsciously trust the emotional framing. The story doesn't feel like gossip. It feels like something meaningful, even when there is no evidence to support it. What's often ignored is that Morgan Freeman never made any public comment related to such a claim. There was no interview, no statement, and no verified reaction. His supposed heartbreaking response existed only in headlines and assumptions. Yet for many viewers, the absence of his actual words didn't matter. The idea of how he would react was enough to satisfy the story. Rob Reiner's position made the situation even more complicated. He has always maintained strict boundaries around his family life. He rarely discusses private matters publicly, and that long-standing silence was suddenly reframed as something suspicious. In today's digital culture, privacy is often treated as secrecy, and secrecy is treated as guilt or confirmation. That shift in thinking is what allowed speculation to thrive. Once the story gained traction, it entered a familiar cycle. Content creators referenced one another instead of original sources. Each retelling softened the uncertainty and hardened the implication. Viewers encountered the claim multiple times across different platforms, which created the illusion of verification. Repetition replaced proof. Another factor that fueled the spread was timing. Stories involving grief and emotional shock perform best when audiences are already overwhelmed with information. In that state, people are less likely to slow down and investigate. They react, share, and comment, often with good intentions, without realizing they are helping a false or unverified narrative grow. This kind of story also benefits from ambiguity. Because nothing is stated outright, creators can avoid responsibility while still provoking a strong response. If questioned, they can claim they never directly said anything factual. Meanwhile, the audience fills in the blanks, often in the most dramatic way possible. What makes this especially troubling is the human cost behind the clicks. Even when claims are unverified, they involve real people. Families are pulled into public conversations they never agreed to be of. Reputations are shaped by narratives that were never confirmed. And audiences are left emotionally affected by something that may not have happened at all. The most important thing to understand here is that this story didn't spread because of new information. It spread because of emotional design. Every word was chosen to trigger reaction, not understanding. And once emotion takes control, truth becomes optional. This is how a headline becomes belief, not through facts, but through feeling. As the story continued to circulate, something subtle but powerful began to happen. Viewers stopped asking where the information came from and started focusing only on how it made them feel. That emotional shift is what turns a rumor into a belief. Once people emotionally commit to a story, facts become secondary, and corrections feel uncomfortable rather than helpful. One of the most effective tricks used in situations like this is emotional association. Morgan Freeman's image is deeply rooted in empathy, reflection, and seriousness. Over decades, audiences have come to associate his voice and presence with truth and gravity. When his name appears in a headline connected to tragedy, people subconsciously assign credibility to the story, even if he has never spoken a single word about it. This creates a dangerous illusion. Viewers believe they are reacting to a real emotional response, when in fact they are reacting to an imagined one. The story doesn't show what Morgan Freeman said. It relies on what people expect him to feel. That expectation fills in the gaps where facts should be, and the mind accepts it without resistance. At the same time, Rob Reiner's reputation adds another layer to the narrative. He is known for meaningful, emotionally grounded work and for staying away from sensational publicity. That seriousness made the claim feel even more believable. People assumed that something truly severe must have happened for a story like this to exist at all. The logic became circular. The story must be true because it feels too serious to be fake. What's rarely acknowledged is how these narratives are engineered to avoid accountability. The language is intentionally vague. No dates are mentioned. No direct quotes are provided. No sources are named. This allows the story to spread freely while staying just out of reach of fact-checking. It's not lying outright, it's implying just enough to let the audience do the rest. Another reason the story gained traction was the way platforms reward engagement. Content that triggers shock or sadness is more likely to be shared, commented on, and watched longer. Algorithms don't measure truth. They measure reaction. Once a story like this starts performing well, it is pushed to even more viewers, creating a feedback loop that makes it feel unavoidable. As more people encountered the claim, social proof took over. Viewers saw thousands of comments expressing grief, sympathy, and shock. That collective reaction reinforced the belief that something terrible must have happened. Few people want to be the one questioning a tragedy, so doubt stays quiet while emotion grows louder. This is where misinformation becomes especially harmful. It doesn't just mislead, it reshapes how people think. Audiences begin to treat implication as confirmation and silence as evidence. Over time, this erodes the ability to separate verified information from emotionally compelling fiction. The absence of any real response from Morgan Freeman was reframed as quiet suffering. The absence of a statement from Rob Reiner was framed as privacy born from pain. These interpretations were never confirmed. Yet they became widely accepted because they fit the emotional story people had already embraced. What's important to recognize is that none of this required malicious intent from viewers. Most people shared the story out of concern or empathy. But good intentions don't prevent harm when the foundation of the story is unstable. Every share strengthened a narrative that may not have reflected reality at all. The lasting impact of stories like this goes beyond one headline. They train audiences to react first and verify later, or not at all. They also normalize the idea that private lives are fair ground for speculation as long as the story feels meaningful enough. In the end, the most powerful part of this situation isn't what was said, but what was assumed. A reaction that never happened became more influential than facts that were never presented. And once that happens, truth has to work twice as hard just to be heard. As days passed, the story began to change shape, not because new facts emerged, but because repetition made it feel more solid. What started as a vague, emotionally loaded claim slowly hardened into something many viewers accepted as reality. This is one of the most dangerous effects of viral storytelling. Familiarity replaces verification. When people hear the same claim often enough, they stop questioning it. At no point did Morgan Freeman publicly acknowledge the story. There was no interview, no statement, and no visible response that could be cited. Yet silence was interpreted as quiet grief. In online culture, absence is often rewritten as meaning. A lack of denial becomes assumed confirmation, even though silence can simply mean refusal to engage with misinformation. Morgan Freeman has always been selective about what he addresses publicly. He has avoided reacting to rumors throughout his career, choosing dignity over damage control. That consistency was ignored here. Instead, audiences projected emotion onto him, imagining how he must feel rather than listening to what he actually said, which was nothing at all. Rob Reiner's situation followed the same pattern. His long-standing decision to protect his family from public scrutiny was suddenly reframed as suspicious. Privacy was mistaken for secrecy. In an environment where everything is expected to be explained immediately, choosing not to speak is often treated as an admission. That mindset strips people of their right to boundaries. What makes this especially troubling is how easily imagination filled the gaps left by facts. Comment sections became spaces where speculation was repeated as certainty. Each emotional comment reinforced the story's credibility for the next reader. Over time, the collective reaction became louder than reality itself. Another key element was the lack of consequences for spreading implication-based narratives. Because no direct claims were made, responsibility remained blurred. Creators could point to wording and say they never stated anything explicitly. Meanwhile, audiences were left carrying the emotional weight of a story that may not have been real. This highlights a growing problem with modern media consumption. People no longer just receive stories, they participate in them emotionally. That participation gives stories power, even when they lack substance. Once viewers invest emotionally, walking the story back feels uncomfortable. Almost like denying someone else's pain, the line between empathy and exploitation becomes dangerously thin. Feeling concern for others is natural, but when that concern is based on unverified claims, it can unintentionally fuel harm. Real families become subjects of public mourning without consent. Real individuals are assigned emotions they never expressed. What's most revealing is how quickly skepticism disappears when a story fits familiar patterns. Tragedy involving famous names feels believable because audiences have seen it before. That familiarity creates trust where caution should exist. The story doesn't need proof. It only needs to feel possible. In reality, the absence of confirmed information should have slowed the narrative, not accelerated it. Instead, it did the opposite. Silence was reshaped into meaning, and assumption was mistaken for insight. This is how stories evolve beyond their origins, becoming something far larger and more damaging than their source. At its core, this situation is not about one headline or one rumor. It's about how easily perception overtakes reality when emotion leads the conversation. Once emotion becomes the foundation, facts are treated as optional rather than essential. And when that happens, the truth doesn't disappear. It simply gets buried under what people feel must be true. By the time the story about Morgan Freeman and Rob Reiner's son reached its peak, it had already taken on a life of its own. Facts no longer mattered. The narrative existed in the collective perception of viewers, shaped by repetition, expectation, and emotion. This is how modern misinformation thrives, not through outright lies, but through suggestion, silence, and implication. The lasting effect on audiences is significant. People experience real emotional responses to events that may never have occurred. They mourn privately, share publicly, and react as though a tragedy has happened, when in reality it was only a narrative constructed from words carefully chosen to provoke grief. That emotional investment makes it harder to accept corrections. Even when the truth emerges, Morgan Freeman and Rob Reiner, as public figures, remain largely unaffected in their personal lives. Yet, the misuse of their names illustrates a deeper problem with online storytelling. Fame and reputation can be weaponized to lend credibility to unverified claims. Audiences, guided by trust in these figures, are quick to accept a story without questioning its origin. This dynamic shows how authority and emotion can be exploited to make fiction feel like fact. Equally troubling is how quickly such stories overshadow real events. Genuine issues, struggles, or achievements may be ignored because fabricated or exaggerated narratives command more attention. This creates a skewed perception of reality where the loudest or most emotionally charged story dominates, regardless of its truthfulness. For families and individuals involved, even in the background, this can feel invasive and manipulative. The spread of this particular claim demonstrates how digital culture rewards emotional engagement over accuracy. Algorithms prioritize content that triggers reactions, not content that is verified or responsible. As a result, sensationalized claims multiply rapidly, creating echo chambers of belief. Viewers participate in this amplification, often unknowingly, by liking, sharing, or commenting based solely on emotional response. Perhaps the most important takeaway is the need for critical thinking and skepticism. Audiences should recognize that a story's emotional power does not automatically confirm its truth. Silence, repetition, and implication can all create the illusion of reality, and high-profile names add credibility that may not exist. Understanding this process is essential to navigating modern media responsibly. The story also reminds us of the human cost behind viral narratives. Real people, whether celebrities or private individuals, can have their lives distorted or misrepresented simply because a story resonates emotionally. Even without intent to harm, repeated exposure to unverified claims can shape public perception, create false narratives, and leave lasting impressions. In the end, the most powerful aspect of this situation is how belief overtook fact. People felt a tragedy that was never confirmed, shared grief for an event that may not have happened, and assumed responses from individuals who never reacted publicly. The lesson is clear. Emotion is persuasive, but it is not proof. In a world where feelings can be amplified faster than facts, discernment is the key to understanding what is real and what is constructed. Stories like this serve as a warning. They show that viral narratives can manipulate hearts and minds without ever presenting truth. They remind viewers to pause before reacting, to question before sharing, and to remember that silence does not equal confirmation. And most importantly, they reveal that the strongest reactions are often to stories that exist only because people want them to feel real.